Fred, thank you so much for being here at Life and Legacies today. We're excited to talk to you and hear more about your life and all that you've done. The first question is the easiest. Can you tell me your full name and how old you are?
Okay, my full name is Walter Frederick Kinsey III, and I'm 88 years old. Was born July 2nd, 1929.
And where were you born?
York, Pennsylvania.
And tell me a little bit about your parents.
Well, my father worked at a variety of jobs. He was a manager, you call him. My mother was a housewife. She didn't work, but she loved kids. And we played a lot of games. We lived in a nice old house that had been a farmhouse at one time in York.
And tell me your parents' names.
My father was Walter, name as mine, but he was Junior, Walter F. Kinsey Jr., but everybody called him Bud, B-U-D, and even I called him Bud, and all my life I've called him Bud. Nobody ever corrected me. And my mother's name was Sarah, Sarah Schweitzer, before marriage.
And you're an only child, but you grew up in a great neighborhood. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, this was during the Depression. It was a neighborhood. People didn't lock their doors. If they did, they provided you with a key hidden somewhere. My mother sometimes would, if she were going to be away and I was at school, she'd tie a key to a handkerchief and I could let myself in. But I was a pretty independent kid.
And you had a lot of friends in the neighborhood, right?
Yes, yes. And as a matter of fact, still keep in touch with one of them.
Fantastic. And tell me a little bit more about the farmhouse. What did it look like? What was it like?
It was an old clapboard wood house, and at one time there would have been some open fields around it. But and we had a variety of trees in the back, cherry trees, apple and pear. My first job, I picked cherries and sold cherries, 10 cents a box.
Out of a little red wagon, right?
Out of a little red wagon.
In that house, you had a really special bedroom, right?
Yeah. I had a large room. I worked on model airplanes. I had Rudyard Kipling's famous poem, "If," hung above my bed. But it was a nice bedroom.
Do you know that poem off by heart now that it was on your wall?
No, I don't. I could probably do part of the end of it. And if you keep your head when all about are losing it, what's more, you'll be a man, my son.
Why that poem?
I don't know. I kind of like poetry, and I have a book of Kipling's. I was very much into British imperialism, the movies, Gun Gadin and Three Feathers and things like that when I was a kid. We paid a dime to go to the movies. And then it went up a penny and we complained.
Seems worth it, right? And talk to me a little bit about where you went to elementary school.
I went to Hartley Elementary School. Was about 2 blocks away, maybe 3 blocks away. Um, Boys and girls were pretty much segregated at the time. Um, when fifth and sixth grade was on the second floor and the lower grades were on the first floor. Boys went up one staircase and girls went up another staircase. How stupid can you get, you know?
And for Halloween, you tried to break those rules.
Halloween, my parents had a cat suit, and I wore this black cat suit. And nobody knew who I was. So I went up the girls' side, and they were sure that I was a girl. Thought I surprised them.
You were a little bit of a rebel sometimes in elementary school.
Indeed I was. Another fella and I were caught chewing gum, and the teacher said, it was third grade, if you don't have enough gum to share with everybody, you got to stop chewing gum. But we had saved our pennies and bought enough for everybody in the class, including the teacher.
Your third grade teacher you liked. Your first grade teacher?
Oh, the first grade teacher, Miss Woodmansey, I guess I had a rebellion. She would come into class and sing, Good Morning, Bright Sunbeams, and we were supposed to sing Good Morning, Fairy Godmother, and I wouldn't sing. So she called my mother in for a conference, and my mother wanted to know why I wouldn't sing Good Morning, Fairy Godmother, and I said, she's not my fairy godmother. And my mother was a bit of a rebellious person, and it cracked her up, so I never sang Good Morning, Fairy Godmother, because she wasn't.
And she didn't look like a fairy godmother either.
She was like what did I describe her as? A ship at full sail.
Not first grade memories, not so good. How about middle school? What happened then?
I loved middle school, and I did very well, 7th and 8th grade. And the war was on, World War II, and my father was sent to California to work on ships, design interiors of ships, and I didn't want to go. And my mother, at one point, my mother was home, and she wanted to be with her husband, and the way we arrived at a solution to this problem was I could stay with my grandfather. My grandmother was deceased, and I could stay home alone. And I did, and finished 9th grade. I was a good student, but at the end of 9th grade, they decided I had to go to California, which I did, and I went to 10th grade in California, Long Beach, California. And I had, for a 15-year-old, I guess, I had some marvelous times. I'd go down on the dock and watch the drunken sailors get tattooed And I was in the Sea Scouts working on, I'd been an Eagle Scout back in New York. In fact, I guess I was the youngest Eagle Scout in York and Adams County. And but I joined a Sea Scout troop in California, and I went sailing on the weekends and camping. Great bunch of guys.
You joined the Sea Scouts because you had been such a big part of the Boy Scouts. When did you first become a Boy Scout?
Well, geez, I can't remember what year it was, but as soon as I was 12 years old, I joined, and I worked hard to get my Eagle Award. And I went to camp every summer if I earned enough money. Camp was like $1 a day at that time.
At camp, you were pretty progressive when it came to a racial issue. What happened?
Oh, the camp director that summer was a Southerner, and he and I were friendly. He was from Kentucky, and the camp, Ganogo, was all white camp. But I'd been there a couple years, and chatting with him one evening, he was telling me that he had a problem. There were 3 blacks scouters coming from Adams County, and didn't know what to do with them. The camp was full to capacity, and he said the only thing we could do is put up some tents and put them into tents, but that's not going to look very good. And I said, well, I don't mind. I'll go in one of the tents with them. There were four-man tents or 4 scout tents. And so I did that. He was so relieved because it solved a problem for him. And when the parents came up that week, they'd come up on a Thursday night. They found me in a tent with 3 blacks. My mother wanted to know what I had done wrong, how I had misbehaved, let's say. And I said, nothing, I volunteered. And all the other parents were kind of shocked at the fact that I would do this. I didn't think anything of it. It just seemed very natural. The kids they were different. I wasn't used to 3 black kids, but I got a little education from them.
You said in your letter, which you came very well prepared, that you didn't even realize it would be an issue.
No, it didn't seem to be a problem.
So then you moved to California. Tell me a little bit more about your time there.
Well, I went to high school in 10th grade, active in the Sea Scouts. Our ship was called the Argo. There were certain restrictions on sailing in and around Long Beach because of the war. There were concerns about possible shelling and so forth. But the Sea Scouts were allowed to sail and do things, so I went out any weekend that I could. The high school was very progressive, and it had a ROTC program, Junior Officer Training Program, and I was very active in that. I took extra courses, and one thing I learned to do was field strip a BAR, which is a Browning automatic rifle. Um, it's usually two men uh, operate the rifle. It's heavy duty, and I could take it apart, put it back together practically with my eyes closed. Um, 10 years later in the Army, that served me pretty well.
What brought your family back to this area, the York area, when you were a junior?
Well, then I came back to York. The war was over, and the shipbuilding industry went flat, and father came back and got another job, and we bought a house, and I went to high school at William Penn High School in York, 11th and 12th grade.
And then you go on to get one of a couple of degrees. Where did you go to college?
When I graduated from William Penn in 1947, I went to Columbia College, part of Columbia University in New York. It was a very, very interesting time. I was 18, and a lot of my classmates were several years older, and they had been at Okinawa and Iwo Jima and the landings at Normandy and the Battle of the Bulge. These were all veterans, and maybe we were separated in age by 3 to 5 years or more. But they treated me as an equal, and I got along very, very well with them. Just, we were good buddies. They're all deceased now, but I was involved in the swimming team at Columbia, and I became manager eventually of the swimming team. And one of the things at Columbia was you had to pass a swimming test to graduate or to stay in school. And coaches didn't want to do that, so I got the assignment, and I never failed any of the vets because some of them couldn't swim. You had to jump in the pool with your clothes and shoes on and then swim 2 laps or something like that. And they all passed.
Many of those veterans that you're talking about, you met in your fraternity.
Yes.
What fraternity were you a part of?
I was in Phi Kappa Psi fraternity, and still in contact with the former roommate who spent 20 odd years in the Navy, and he was a submarine captain. But the other fellows have passed on. They were older and not always in the best of health.
What made you decide to join the fraternity?
Well, at that time, there wasn't much social life at Columbia. They didn't have a student center. And I was sort of pushed, encouraged to join it.
One of your fraternity brothers is the person that kind of started your career. What class did you take that piqued your interest?
Clyde Gould urged me to take this course in anthropology with Professor Wagley, who was an expert in South America, um, uh, South American tribes. And he was impressive, and I took more and more courses. And Elman Service was my advisor then, and brilliant man.
And you were a good student all the way through. But going outside of the classroom, in 1950, you and a friend decided to go on a double date.
Oh, yeah. Don Cohen and I were good buddies. Don became an attorney in New York, and we went on a double date. I wasn't too thrilled with the end of the date. Who I was, at first was okay, and he wasn't. He was Jewish, and he didn't care too much. And I ended up dating the woman, the girl that he had dated, and eventually we married.
And
That was Betty Kinsey, who was a nurse at the York Hospital.
how long?
And we married in 1951 when I had graduated.
Did you know she was someone you wanted to marry right away? That's pretty quick.
No, no, I think our first date was a year earlier. So,
And now
Yeah.
tell me about how were the first years of your marriage for you? Financially and circumstances, pretty difficult.
well, she was working at the Cornell Medical Center in the pediatric ward, and I was going to school full time and also working at Columbia part time. And in the summers, I went to whatever job I could get full time. And what an instant I didn't have enough money for tuition, and I was suggested that I talk to Dean Kraut, who was running the university. The actual president was Dwight Eisenhower, who was running for president, or the nomination for president. And I went up and asked Dean Kraut, and he wanted to know if I was in good standing, and said yes. And he made a phone call, wrote out a check, and there was my tuition. Now that would never happen today. You would, a lowly graduate student would never get to see the provost of the university that easily, that quickly.
And then have his tuition paid for.
Yeah, and get his tuition.
So were you in school when you were drafted?
I had just completed my master's in 1953, 2 years after my bachelor's degree. Yeah, there were various times when they were trying to draft us. It was the Korean War, and I got several deferments for educational deferments, but finally they said, that's it, and I got a draft notice. So I did my basic training in, it's now Fort Gordon, Georgia. At the time it was called Camp Gordon in the South. And then I went to two, I was in the Signal Corps, and I went to two technical schools at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And then from there, I was shipped overseas and expected to go to Korea, but I went to the Chief Signal Supply Center. Before I was shipped overseas, um, and we realized my wife was pregnant, uh, I asked for a deferment of being shipped overseas until the child was born. And it went through the chain of command, but came back denied in Washington. And uh, so I did end up in Japan. My wife the child was born in September, and I arrived in Japan in August. Uh, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have wireless communication. And the way I found out that my daughter Amy had been born, that I had a daughter, was I got called down to the company headquarters, and there was a telegram that was about 2 or 3 days old that my wife had delivered a daughter.
How did you celebrate?
How did I celebrate? Another fella and I went out and had some sake and sushi.
And what was your trip like coming back from Japan?
Oh, well, you don't have private accommodations on a troop ship. Our ship went through Alaskan waters. We didn't have any warm clothing. I think it took 3 weeks for the ship to get from Yokohama to Seattle, Washington. And I had probably around 799 roommates in the bow of the ship. The weather was fierce and was pounding. Almost everybody was ill. I was not. But even some of the sailors were ill because of the rough seas. But once we got out of Alaskan waters, it calmed down, and we got home. And we were hoping we would fly us east for discharge, but they put us on a troop train, and we went across the northern tier states and stopped every once in a while, and we were treated royally. And it wasn't as bad as we anticipated.
Betty was staying with your parents at the time.
Yes.
What was that like? You got to surprise your family and see Amy for the first time.
Well, I got into Fort Meade, Maryland, which is not very far from New York, and it was Memorial Day weekend. Everybody was on leave. And I couldn't go home. I didn't have a car, and there's no transportation direct. So another fellow and I, who lived in southern New York, we talked to a cab driver and we had, we had some money. So we hired a cab to take us to York. He got off at New Freedom, and I got home and saw my daughter for the first time. She was 9 months old.
And what did she look like?
What did she look like? She was pretty cute, I thought. Uh, and I picked her up, and she started crying because I was a stranger. But in fairly short order, we were able to bond.
Now, what were some of your main duties when you were in the service?
Uh, I repaired signal equipment, telephones and teletypewriters, and worked with the Japanese on repairing the beat up equipment that was coming back from Korea. Um, none of it, none of it is used today because uh, it's you just don't use teletypewriters or these old field telephones. So I wasn't learning a trade.
You came home and started your career. Tell me a little bit about what your first steps were in your archaeology career.
Well, I got a job at the State Museum in Harrisburg as, well, called state archaeologist, but actually it was I charge of archeo- archaeological collections and any field work that we might do, and did a lot of little projects. Uh, Probably the most significant one was I found the first longhouse that had ever been excavated, certainly in Pennsylvania, but it was a Susquehanna longhouse, 92 feet long by 24 feet wide, and found the exact outline of it, and there were pits, fire pits, and so forth.
What's that feeling like when you saw it?
Well, it isn't suddenly a revelation because you don't see it all at once. You you work on it, uh, you nibble at it is what you're doing, and finally you get the whole picture.
And that must be amazing.
Yeah.
Finally, right?
Hmm.
And then you moved on to the North Museum. Was that your?
Well, I worked at the State Museum for 8 years uh, in two capacities. The first as I was archaeologist, curator of archaeology, and then 3 years as chief curator, director of the William Penn Memorial Museum, and then moved to Franklin and Marshall in 1963 and became assistant professor and director of the North Museum.
How many students did you have when you were a professor? Because I heard that a lot of them still keep in touch with you.
Well, our classes at F&M were not large. Maybe the largest class might have been 20 plus, 22 or something like that. Smallest class, maybe 4. But the I had gotten a series of grants to do field work in the Upper Delaware River Valley. That's from oh, up to Port Jervis, New York, and 37 miles of river bottom on the Pennsylvania side. So I worked up there for 10 or 12 years and uh, always would hire or use students that I had in the class, and some of them went on to careers in archaeology, went on and got their PhDs and so forth.
And you have your PhD. Where is it from?
Yes, I got a PhD. Uh, I took a sort of sabbatical, and but I was still running the museum. It took a year to finish the coursework and got my PhD at Catholic University in Washington, Catholic University of America, the full title. And as far as the dissertation is concerned, um, I used field work from the Upper Delaware as uh, as my dissertation, and let's see, and that was eventually published as a monograph.
And how many years did you spend running the North Museum?
27 years at the North Museum and teaching at F&M, and was chairman of the anthropology department for 5 years.
Where did you find the time?
I couldn't do it today, but I was younger then, and multitask and driven. I'm 88 now and a lot slower.
The North Museum is still such a prominent part of Lancaster and education in this area. How has it changed over the years for you?
I'm all for the rocks and minerals, for the artifacts, for the animal remains and so forth. And it's become more, and this is happening all over in museums, more push button and gadget and display oriented and than I am. I'm an oldie moldy in that sense.
27 years there, though. What are some of the highlights for you at the museum?
Well, when I started, it was an all volunteer organization. Uh, Eventually, I got a professional staff, and we were accredited twice by the American Association of Museums. So that was an accomplishment, and I'm proud of that. The museum now has gone beyond that. Um, but yeah.
So when did you decide to retire?
Oh, let's see, I retired in 1990, and started my own business, consulting business, and worked on smaller projects. I wouldn't do anything like this present pipeline, um, but and then my wife died in the year 2000, and 2001 I had met Carol at church, and had some extra tickets for the Fulton. My first wife and I went to, had subscription tickets and took Carol, asked her if she wanted to go to the Fulton. And surprisingly, she accepted. And the rest is history. We uh, went to a lot of, oh, we go to Ephrata, the symphony, and enjoy all the cultural things in Lancaster. Uh, and she had her own business. She had her own cosmetology school. And for the first year of our marriage, she was working and then coming home, and here I was either working or working on a project of some sort. And she sold her business, and the rest is history. We started traveling. We've been to on some amazing trips.
Where's your favorite place?
People ask that, and I would say this: do you like natural history? Do you like animals that you want to go on safari? And I guess we've been on about 5 safaris in Africa. We shoot pictures, not animals. So if you like that, if you like cultural things, Turkey is wonderful. I've been to Turkey a couple of times. If you just want pure beauty and scenery, Antarctica is pretty hard to beat, and so is the American Southwest. So it depends what you like.
Well, you were pretty lucky to find Carol, who was ready and willing to travel. When did you guys get married?
We got married in 2001. July 2001.
Your birthday month. And where was your wedding?
In the Unitarian Church of Lancaster.
And how is your relationship with Amy now?
Well, it's fine. She and Carol get along. But my daughter lives in Houston, so it's not like we see her every weekend.
And Carol has children too, right?
Carol has 2 sons and 3 grandkids.
And what are their names?
Oh, Dalton, Meredith, and Jacqueline.
And where do they live?
Ohio, Illinois, and Harrisburg area.
So lots of traveling there too, if you want to see them.
Yeah.
So how often do you travel?
Well, just recently we were on the Mississippi in a Mark Twain type paddle boat with a big paddle wheel for 2 weeks, starting in Nashville, Memphis, and then down to New Orleans. And that was in November, just last month. And before that, in, I guess, August, we had been to Maine with AAA and some of our friends.
I love Maine. We had a great time there. And I was in New Orleans last week.
Oh.
So do you like to eat when you go to all these places?
Who doesn't like lobster Yeah.
So is that where you get,
Jambalaya.
right? And oysters. I'm a big oyster fan.
I am an oyster fan. Are you an oyster fan?
Huge oyster fan. Rockefeller on the raw anything.
Yeah.
Yes. Where has the best food been when you're traveling?
Oh, that's hard to say. But there was a little place, hole in the wall, in Turkey that in Istanbul, maybe 3 or 4 tables, they sucked us in and prepared some of the best fish I've ever eaten. And then this Valparaiso chili. We had fresh Chilean sea bass at a walk upstairs restaurant looking out over the docks and so forth. It was pretty hard to beat. It was part of the atmosphere too.
Did you start traveling before you retired, or really did it kick in after?
No, I put together some trips at the museum. We had what we called rambles, and so I led a lot of trips there. And then 3 buddies and I planned a number of trips, and we'd go without our wives, just the 4 of us.
Guys' weekends. I do those, but with girls' trips, girls' weekends. And on your safaris, 5 times? What makes you keep going back?
Uh, well, to see these animals without any bars that are not in cages is just so moving, so impressive that now we didn't go back. Sometimes we'd be in one country and then go to another country, see different animals. But I like to, both of us like to see the animals in their natural habitat.
So we know the safaris, Turkey. Where else have you two gone together in the last 16 years?
Antarctica, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, China, Croatia, Greece, Crete, Egypt. We were the first American tour group and after 9/11 in Egypt.
What was that like?
It was a little tense, especially when you saw trains that had been shot up, and there was always an armed guard with us. I didn't always have the best behavior. I'd have a tendency to wander off and then get pulled back.
That's a trend with you, even from your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
You lived through some major events. You're talking about going to Egypt after 9/11. Also, Pearl Harbor is something that you mentioned in your writings. What's your memory?
Well, let's see, it was probably 8th grade, 7th or 8th grade. It was 1941, of course, and Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and it was on a Sunday, and right walked inside. My father said Pearl Harbor was bombed. Well, nobody had heard of Pearl Harbor. He knew where it was and from the radio. And the next day in school, we were all called to an auditorium to listen to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, and his a date that'll live in infamy speech. We heard it and declared war. And there was a big cheer went up. And I remember I didn't cheer. When we got to class, the teacher, who I liked very much, she explained, she said, it's serious. War is not something pleasant. And I was the only one that I think that grasped that before she dealt with that issue. Because I know I didn't cheer in the auditorium. Another incident was I was in Japan 10 years after the dropping of a bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And another GI and I went to this theater ostensibly to see a movie. And what it was commemoration of the 10 years of the dropping of the bomb. And we were the only non-Asians in there. And I wasn't sure what to do, whether just keep our place or walk out and let these people express themselves. And so Dick and I stayed, but it was a very uncomfortable situation.
All of these moments, all of these memories, what are some lessons that you want people to know, some things that you learned? Wisdom.
I don't have any lock on wisdom. I think I've lived life as best I could. I've had some serious health issues, and I think I've survived them because of determination. I spent a week in hospice, and I'm a hospice dropout. And I could have just given up and quit. Carol has been a great help as far as pushing me, and I nearly choked to death in a restaurant on some food, and was fortunate that there was a nurse there and the ambulance came very quickly and took me to the hospital, and I'm still here.
And you were at the dermatologist today, right?
Yeah, I was at the dermatologist today and had skin lesions taken care of.
All those days in the sun. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed talking to you. Is there anything else you'd like to add today?
No.
No? No other stories?
Probably.
Save them for another time. Well, thank you again, and I'm glad Carol's part of this story, and you're going to continue writing about your life, right?
Right.
Go think of a few more things then. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.